One of the things a lot of governments are struggling with right now is obviously COVID-19, and especially how once somebody gets infected with it, the amount of time that they can remain asymptomatic but still be spreading that. And we hear about quarantine, we hear about how do we flatten the curve, and there are so many different elements and so many different things to think of. But one of those is tracking. That's why we're bringing on Wayne Llyod here, the CEO of TraceSafe, to talk a little bit more about his company and how the services that they provide are helping to solve this issue. So, my good man, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Absolutely, and it must be a whirlwind for your company over the last little while, especially with how COVID has really spread everywhere. Everyone's talking about it, and it's affected almost everyone across the globe one way or another. If you can give us a brief overview of who you are, but also what your company is doing in this space.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Wayne Lloyd, a technology entrepreneur. My specialty is really tech M&A. And so finding companies that have interesting use cases and um, raising capital. Um, TraceSafe came about, they're actually a long-term technology play in the real-time location services. So their original product was tracking infants in a maternity ward setting. So they built the entire infrastructure around kind of medical application of making sure that the infants, from the time they were born, they get one of these bracelets, and it's to make sure that nothing happens in any of that time during their hospital stay. The hospital staff can identify exactly where they are at any given time. So no mix-ups happen. And really that's important because when they had their breakout product, which was around COVID, contact tracing, and quarantine management. But originally the product was architected for use in hospitals. And that's important because it's maintaining privacy for all the patients, dealing with all the patient records. And secondly, doing large scale integrations for things like access control systems and all those very complicated APIs and large kind of enterprise builds. They're already sort of geared up for that type of application. So that's the pedigree of the company, and that's where they came from. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic has really accelerated the need for this, and the TraceSafe team really answered the call when it came to ramping up their production and supply chain and technology integrations in response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, for an investor curious about this, how does the system actually work? Is it being, and also where are you looking to implement this system?
So there's really two distinct product categories. The first is the quarantine management system, and that's the system we're really famous for. We've probably deployed into more governments and have more active users than almost any other competitor there due to our involvement in the Hong Kong deployment. So the quarantine management is effectively you enter a country and you get a wristband, and it's to just have a technology solution to self quarantine. So the countries want to know that people are uh, obeying their quarantine and complying in it, and so the tools are geared towards that exactly. The second category is contact tracing. Contact tracing is quite different from the fact that it's not GPS based, where the quarantine management is, and there's a lot more privacy concerns because your data is not in the hands of a health authority or a designated health authority that's going to have all of your private data. Uh, Anyways, it's for use in stadium deployments, enterprise deployments, and elsewhere, where there's a totally different set of privacy regulations and different expectations around what your employer or a venue or anyone else might have access to from a privacy perspective, and also from a form factor perspective. You're not going to have the same wristband. People aren't going to wear wristbands to work, for example. You'll have something integrated with their lanyard or other form factors. So there's a whole host of form factors on the contact tracing side that we can talk about as well.
Yeah, it's actually one of my questions because obviously COVID-19, it's something that's very important right now. World governments are trying to figure out in many different ways what is the proper solution of fighting it, of tracing it, and all those different elements. But at the same time, I can imagine an investor would be curious. Are there other areas in which you're deploying this technology, and are those other areas, are they able to generate a lot of revenue streams and things like that? If you can talk about that a little bit more, because you already mentioned a few things like stadiums and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think on the enterprise side, there's a particularly interesting use case. Our chief revenue officer's name is Gord Zielstra. He came through the sort of HR enterprise sales um, space. So he worked for Taleo, which was acquired by Oracle. He then went to work for SuccessFactors, which was acquired by SAP. So his entire career has been deploying HR software into the sort of global 1000. And the feedback we got from him, he didn't join the company because he thought this was an interesting COVID play. He joined the company because, in his multi-decade career in the HR space, wearables have sort of been something that has been always on the periphery, but actually something that's been really wanted by a lot of these HR departments. And so the COVID-19 pandemic is really an it's accelerated a lot of things in our work lives, with regards to remote work, technology enabled things. And I think on the at the HR side, accelerating wearables into the workplace is something that we're following as a major theme. And so that idea of having wearables in the workplace, that's really a game changer for this. And this is being enabled by the pandemic, but the real benefits and use cases are quite immense, as employee time tracking, bonusing, particularly around liability for people in remote sites. There's already a lot of legislation that's come into effect around kind of safety in remote areas. Um, and I think that employers, and we're going to see how this plays out, but it already feels to some extent that we're in a post-COVID environment where employers are having to answer towards the broader sort of wellness question and the broader health and safety question around how they get their employees back to work, and once they're back at work, how do they keep them feeling safe and feeling engaged at their jobs? Because right now, predominantly most of the AAA office space in major metropolitan areas is, quite frankly, empty. And so we're a big part of bringing people back into that fold.
Okay, so when thinking about this, then especially from the enterprise side of things, because when you first hear about it, you think, okay, maybe it's for governments and being able to use for those who are quarantined, making sure they stay quarantined. That's where we were talking about the privacy things, and especially in the Western world, where people are very concerned about that. But there's also this element in which you can have it for those different corporations where people would all be there, and the same thing, same about the tracking. But if they know, hey, there's been an outbreak in a mall, if there's been an outbreak in one of these buildings, you can go look
Mhm.
back and see your employees' name tags and wonder, did they come in contact with this individual? Is that kind of one of the things as well that you're focusing on?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the difference between our quarantine management product, which is only for sale to governments, and sort of the privacy implications of that are obviously the data is so sensitive and only should be in possession of by the relevant health authorities. On the contact tracing side of the business, we're really obsessive about privacy. I mean, to the point where we're consulting with all of the major privacy experts around the world, building privacy by design into our product. Um, we'll have a lot of announcements as far as these privacy initiatives, but we actually brought on a chief privacy officer to kind of go, with a fine tooth comb over every element in our app and our architecture to make sure that everything is kept 100% private, because that we consider that one of our core differentiators is that we're a privacy focused company. When you look at the alternative, it tends to be apps, and apps have a lot of inherent limitations, but they also have a lot of kind of lingering side effects. You can imagine if your employer asked you to download an app that would track you potentially at work, and you don't know, would it continue to track you after you left the workplace? That's why we think wearables is a real answer. Uh, Number one, because in a lot of work that's outside of office jobs, you're not really allowed to have your cell phone on you. If you work in an oil refinery or a pulp mill or something like that, it's really discouraged or even forbidden to have your cell phone on you. So it's not an effective tracking mechanism there, anyways. Um, and the wearable factor, you know that when you can see the wearable, there's potentially, a tracking element, and when you don't, when you if you leave it attached to your hard hat at work, you know you're not being tracked at home. And that's something that it really helps with our sales process, moving through these HR departments. These HR departments are not trying to spy on their workers. They're trying to promote health, wellness, and safety in the workplace. So they don't want to implement these types of app solutions, which just leave a big question mark with the workers and the management about how and what information exactly is being collected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate it because, again, one of the questions that I had in my mind is, what's the effectiveness of your system compared to others? And one of those others would be apps. We're seeing it all the time. If you're in Canada, especially in Ontario, that COVID tracking app was automatically downloaded into all of our phones. And
Oh
that's when you
wow.
start looking at things where the privacy concerns, and this is where a lot of people get their ammo for saying, wait a second, we can't be tracked like this. We should want to and go into that. But when it comes to a lot of these businesses, yeah, they have to know where are if you're in a remote place and you're doing a mining or an oil rig, like you're saying, where is that individual? Are
Mhm.
they in somewhere where they're not safe? So there is a difference between those two. So I appreciate you going over that. But are there any competitors that are doing wearables and more specifically on exactly what you're doing? And how do you differentiate from those competitors?
Yeah, and so first of all, I should just note the app that was built by the team at Shopify, and I think in sort of loose cooperation with the government. Uh, that app, as far as I know, has a very, very, very positive privacy focus element to it, where they're using the correct APIs. They're not tracking people, and those. So I think those guys should be commended. They're doing a great job. I think that what ends up happening, and we've seen it in Norway, Germany, Australia, many of these countries that put out the apps, they just don't get enough critical mass of usage because people are just concerned generally about it. So that's why we see localized contact tracing as a way to sort of um, be more effective, um, be a more effective way to manage sort of areas where there might have be it temporarily higher density, and to make sure that people are. The other thing is making sure that people are adhering to social distancing guidelines in acute areas. I'll give you an example. In Singapore, we're working with a construction company. It's one of the largest construction companies in Singapore, called Bosted, and they had a specific request, which was to alert around social distancing violation. So if you come too close to your coworker for too long, and in their case, they have total control over it as far as how long that interaction should be. It's the time and distance is the two variables that they can change. Most people are going in lockstep with sort of CDC and WHO guidelines, which is about close contact for more than 15 minutes as being a kind of social distancing violation. But they wanted to have something that alerted to the social distancing, not just tracked it. And as far as I know, none of the apps are doing social distancing alerting, just because the phones, the way they're set up, they're just not designed for that sort of thing. So as far as effectiveness, the product is extremely effective, and extremely reliable. It's been out and tested in the wild. We have hundreds of thousands of our wearable devices that have been deployed to date, and it's a very reliable system, very customizable for each enterprise how they want to do it. There's also kind of, and without getting too deep into things, we have certain architectural advantages in the way our cloud system is deployed that make it so there's less dependencies on outside APIs and things like that, which is very attractive. Again, from a privacy preserving perspective.
Yeah, and I appreciate going over that because it's something that many people are very curious about. They see tracing, they see tracking, and immediately we start thinking of Minority Report. We start thinking of all these different negative effects of them, and those things are very important. We have to keep those things in our mind, not in so much the movie, of course, but just the implications of it, and make sure that we're doing
Yeah.
things in a safe way that protects people's privacy. At the end of the day, when you're talking about from a workplace perspective, especially it could be very, very useful for these employers, being able to make sure everyone is safe and okay. So I appreciate the detailed explanation on that.
Yeah, and just a quick additional note. So in our contract tracing product, there is no GPS built into that product. So there's no way for you to be tracked outside of a workplace situation. So really, all they're trying to track, again, the health and wellness and safety aspect is, did you come into contact with another employee at work, and for how long, and so that they can go back and see if there is an infection or someone at your workplace. They can go back and put the people that were exposed on leave and carry on with business. I think most businesses and most enterprises, the way they're looking at it, is this is sort of like a continuity insurance policy. Nobody knows. There's a few landmark court cases that are happening in New York that will establish kind of employee responsibility in regards to their reaction to COVID-19 and the steps they were taking, and what is a reasonable and responsible way to approach this. In the meantime, we see the smartest corporations out there being proactive and trying to do the right thing, and making sure that, I think nobody wants to see these lockdowns. Um, so this is a proactive way that we can kind of keep the economy running, make sure that businesses have continuity, and that when there is a case at a workplace, you can kind of be more surgical, and instead of having to shut things down completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, another question I have, I know you recently just finished financing. So,
Mhm.
always, having cash on hand always helps with pushing the company forward. What plans do you have with that capital in order to uh, maybe it's searching new revenue streams, maybe it's working on research and development for things that you're currently on, and ultimately looking to increase shareholder wealth and your share price for your
Yeah.
company. Where is that money currently going to be going?
So in the time since we started that cap raise, we've built five additional products and five additional form factors that based on customer feedback. So a good amount of the capital is going to be going into deploying those pieces. Two of those pieces are actually gateways that are additional layers to the privacy thing. So even in our quarantine management product now, you're not going to need any cell phone in the future. So our next major government deployment will not be a pairing the cell phone uh, kind of use case. Um, so we're going to um, those additional form factors, which are effectively ready to be deployed now and are being deployed selectively at different workplaces and enterprises and different governments. And really, it's the majority of the work is, or the majority of the capital is tooling up the team so we can have the ability to scale rapidly and delivering on the major orders that we have in our pipeline. So we have a massive order book, different companies, governments that are continuing to order our product, and we need to make sure that we can deliver. Obviously, these government orders are quite sensitive as far as delivery dates and the promises they're making on their side. So really, it's delivering orders and generating revenue immediately for our shareholders. That's our number one priority.
Perfect. Well, hey, I appreciate very much, Wayne, for taking the time and going over this. It seems like a very interesting aspect of where the world is going. A lot of it needs to be able to be accountable, especially with businesses, with governments, and things of the like. But also having a very privacy um, focused approach to that is almost equally as important. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with investors right now. Just to finish off, if someone was the wanting to find out more about you, where can they turn?
Yeah, so our website is tracesafe.io. And I think that's the best place to start. If you're interested on the investment side, sign up for our newsletter. That's where we distribute all the information ongoing as far as corporate developments and any press releases that we send out. So that's the best place to go.
Absolutely. Well, once again, I appreciate very much your time and look forward to paying attention to your company over the next little while and seeing where you can take everything with TraceSafe here.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care now.